Okay, you're ready to go, Jason.
All right, thank you, Vanessa. All right, good evening. Welcome to the Capital Planning Committee, Monday, August 31st, 2020, 7 p.m. Read a quick statement pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting, the Southborough Capital Planning Committee, will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and or requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the Town of Southborough's website at www.southboroughtown.com. For this meeting, members of the public who wish to watch or participate in the meeting may do so in the following manner by finding the meeting at www.southboroughtown.com/remote meetings. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so despite best efforts, we will post on Southborough's website an audio or video recording transcript or other comprehensive recording of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting. With that said, I'll call us officially to order. I see all members present except for Mr. Palmer. The next item on our agenda is approval for meeting minutes from August 10th, 2020 and August 18th, 2020. We did not have a quorum at the BOS meeting, so there's nothing to do there. So we are really just looking at the meeting minutes from August 10th, 2020 that Joe had circulated. I'll open it up for any feedback or questions.
I've got a couple things, if that's okay.
Go ahead, Jeff.
In the first section, approval of the meeting minutes, I would say that we voted 501 by roll call to approve the meeting minutes because Kathy was not present, so she abstained.
Yeah.
For the previous meeting. Sorry. Some other comments. Let's see. Sorry. I have a question for the group in section 8 in terms of at the
section 8, you said?
Yes. The fall meeting where Mrs. Braccio and Mr. Purple asked the fire and health departments to produce articles needed addressed in the fall meeting. I thought it was if they had weighed in on the safety and they weren't going to be producing articles. So I just wanted to make sure that was that correction was correct, I guess, for lack of better words.
Yes, I think that's accurate.
Okay. And then, Jason, your last name needs to be updated in section 12 from MEL-INO-WSKI to MEL-INO-WSKI. Those are the big things. There's a couple of other spelling errors.
So I had a bunch too. Yeah. What I would maybe suggest is, in the interest of time, Jeff, if you want to redline
sure.
Any comments you have, and then I will send that. We can send that to the group. Sure. And my guess is it's going to accomplish some of the same things. I would also suggest maybe that you put this in. I know Joe had used a different program to produce these. I'm a big fan of having consistent, at least, presentation of the minutes, regardless of who's doing them. Obviously, styles are going to be different in terms of how we write them, but just the headings and some of that stuff. So if you want to mark up, just use track changes with all that. We can approve it at our next meeting. I think that's the wisest thing to do. Did anyone else have other changes other than kind of the general direction Jeff was going? Okay. So Jeff, why don't you do that, and then we'll just vote on the track changes version at the next meeting. I'd rather them be accurate. We got 3 meetings to get them approved. We're still within our day, and we have a draft that's available if the clerk needs them.
Sounds great.
Okay. So we're going to move on to the next item, which is the solid waste analysis. We have Mr. Butler with us. Before I turn the floor over to him, just a few things on format of how we're going to run the meeting this evening, especially given that we have the public attending the meeting. We're going to let Mr. Butler run through his presentation, start to finish. I would ask that the committee, unless there's some dire question that you really want to get in, And let's use the raise hand button for that. If you really want to add something before he's done, let him go through the presentation. We'll just literally go around probably alphabetically to the committee with any questions, comments, and then we'll open up to the public at the end for questions. Mr. Butler has indicated about an hour and a half for his portion of the presentation, and then we'll spend about 30 minutes on Q&A. And I think one of the bullets really captured it, right? This is a start, right? This may not be the last time we discuss this topic. Before I turn it over, I just really wanted to, on behalf of this committee and the town, thank Mr. Butler for volunteering his time. While I think, obviously, with the direction we go with all of this, and obviously there's going to be a lot of other stakeholders other than just this committee that are going to use the output to formulate the plan for the town. I mean, this is something that typically we would pay for. And I think, you know, we're in very good hands just by my preview with John and some of the discussions I had with him as he went through the analysis with Karen. But I also think it's really important to acknowledge that he worked very collaboratively with Karen on this. This isn't, John just wasn't off doing, like, Karen spent a lot of time with John getting Absolutely. The data and invalidating the data that is coming back to us tonight. So I think that also, you know, a kudos to Karen for her willingness to work with John, willingness potentially for change, which is never easy for anyone. And obviously we'll see where we go with the presentation, but John, I'm sure you get many more kudos at the end, but I would be remiss not to start with kudos and send you along your way. So okay, I will mute myself as well, and we'll turn it over to you.
Mute yourself, so if I go share screen here, there's an option to share just the window. I think I'll try that. That should make it larger for you. Mm-hmm. Also, there are other people in attendance. So I guess you see them, Jason, but I do not. Is that right?
Yes. There are members of the public and members of other committees. And I also see Mr. Ballantyne in the audience. Okay.
All right. So I'm going to try this, and we'll see if you are you seeing?
We are good.
Yes.
We are good.
Okay. So this has gone on since roughly late May, and we're at a good place to give people a review, assuming it works. All right, so the goal of this is a comprehensive review. This is the first full report. There are a variety of follow-ups possible. I'll list those at the end. The topics I'm going to go through: a little bit of background on the US and Mass DEP specified situation with respect to solid waste. Let me just see something here, something I don't need. Hang on here. All right. Then we're going to look at the current Southborough operations. Seem to have messed up something here. Are you seeing the window okay, or is there a yellow line down the right?
We see an orange line on the right side, but it is not blocking any of the content.
Yeah, so I think I can do it this way. All right, then.
That's perfect.
I looked at comparable towns. I'll explain how we arrived at those. Then we're going to look at specifically a set of choices, one of which was specifically floated by DPW chief and others that have been sometimes discussed. And then there'll be review of conclusions and follow-ups. So what's the context we find ourselves in? Just a brief overview of this. In the United States, landfills take 53% of solid waste, but it's only 24% here in New England. They work great where the land is abundant. You know, the price currently for tipping, the so-called price of getting rid of trash, is $24 a ton in Mississippi, but it's about $100 a ton here in Massachusetts. We do ship some of our solid waste from Massachusetts out to places in the West. Waste to energy, which is or WTE, which is a term for incineration, which produces electricity, takes about 13% of US waste, but in New England, it's 41%. The process is now cleaner than ever, but it's never perfect. It's high capital investment, and there's always siting problems. The European countries are mostly going this way. They're building WTE plants now regularly. And once again, Mass DEP is willing to license a new WTE plant, although there are no proposals. Recycling currently takes 34%. It's fairly politicized, and it is quasi-scientific, although sometimes the science has a hard time pushing through. It's pretty well working for non-plastics, but for plastics, it became deeply broken a few years ago when China put a stop on worldwide shipments of plastics or commingled waste into China. And so there's a big pile up everywhere outside of China of stuff that used to go there, including here in Massachusetts. There are many problems with plastics recycling right now. It has the potential to work scientifically, but it isn't really working as a functioning process. There are some issues of the potential environmental science changing the priorities of recycling, because you may get one set of answers if you focus on contaminants, and another set of answers if you focus on global warming or CO2 production or other greenhouse gas production. So that's the kind of biggest picture we're going to look at tonight. Source reduction, that's really what is needed. It's what everyone wants, but it's very difficult to achieve. The US per capita is flat. That's good, but since the population is rising, it's not so good. Southborough, however, is doing a little bit better than the US as a whole. Worldwide, it's a much bigger problem with it growing fast. 30% of the waste flow is packaging. That's the best candidate for reduction right off the bat, but it's still going the wrong way for plastics. Recycling of cardboard works pretty decently. Now, that's sort of background. We, however, don't get to deal with any of that because we just follow the rules based on those kinds of considerations that Mass DEP makes for us. They are pushing recycling both by regulation and advocacy. They don't have any good answers for plastics and commingled, but they've had some successes. Some of those we don't see, like food waste from restaurants, they've been regulating and doing a good job on. It's difficult what they do, and it's easy to criticize them. MSW, which is what refuse, that's the term for the stuff that goes in the big hopper. Waste to energy is now viewed as the least bad once again. Most former Massachusetts landfills are closed. There are a few open. And shipment to out of state is taking up the gap because we haven't built any WTE plants in quite a while. It's worth noting that by statute, the Board of Health, the Southborough Board of Health, every local Board of Health has regulatory authority for solid waste collection and disposal, particularly regarding quality assurance. This reflects the original reason why government got involved in trash, which was public health. It's a public health issue if it gets neglected. And the Board of Health is active in some towns, not here. Hasn't done anything here in about 30 years. But because of their statutory role, I did notify both the chairperson of the board as well as the Board of Health, Paul Pazinski, the Board of Health agent of the existence of this study. So again, to summarize then about the background or context, waste to energy is stable and preferred for Massachusetts. It's what we're doing. It's a place called Wheelabrator where it goes. Recycling is not really stable as a whole. And so we had to be prepared for volatility and change with respect to recycling. Right now, our cost per ton for recycling is about $57 on average. Very big variations, $100 for commingled and $20 for cardboard and newsprint. But it's probably safest to assume in the long term that those things are going to be pretty close to one another as they are now. Okay, now next topic, the current Southborough situation. Many of you may know this, but I'm going to review. What do we do now? We've got a transfer station that's town run as an option for residents only. It's not an option for commercial. It's funded mostly by sticker prices, 80% of coverage or 78% of coverage of the cost. It's not a pay-as-you-throw system. That is, you put stuff in the hopper and it doesn't have to be in special bags or tagged or anything. And then if you want curbside, you have to get it privately. About 30% of households approximately are served by curbside. We did a little bit of a survey, or rather Karen did, of the suppliers, and we got a number of 435 that households that we were told about that had curbside. But if you look at the total households and you subtract how many subscribers there are to the transfer station, which we know both of those numbers, then there's about 650 households are unaccounted for. Some of those are in condo complexes that may have been counted as one by the contractor. So we presume that there are a little over 1,000 curbside customers. And that's probably rising slowly as a number, but we don't have any handle on the tonnage. We have almost no handle on the tonnage, I should say. Commercial users, as I said, must contract privately. Because of that, I did contact the Economic Development Commission early on just to say, hey, we're doing this. Is this an issue? They said no. I said, well, okay, you know about it. If you want to, watch the meeting plan for capital planning, and you may catch a meeting if you want to, but they have not been, they're not saying, oh, we need a fix of this problem. Okay, now we're going to look at operations, Southborough Operations. Breaks down as to these topics. We'll jump into them. The transfer station itself is 44 years old. It was built before there was any recycling done by the town. It was recycling services were added there as a physical facility that you know now around 2001. It's in a visually separate area. It's obvious if you use a transfer station, that's potentially important for how we operate it. The trash hopper, the MSW hopper, can be maintained indefinitely, according to Karen, and with good planning, that is, it can be, and I think we have that. Costs $5,000 to $10,000, a little more, typically per year for maintenance. We maintain key parts on site. We occasionally have major repairs, but are unlikely to suffer prolonged downtime, and that's borne out by the history. The two physical areas imply that we need two staff attendants over there at a minimum. And there might be staff savings if it was rebuilt with better sight lines. That could be a goal of rebuilding. Now we have a firm called Wheelabrator who runs a WTE plant in Millbury. Sometimes you'll hear them just called Millbury. They take our non-recyclables. Our contract runs through 2027. And we probably have a stable situation through the end of 2027. In other words, about 7.5 more years. It may be stable beyond that. The plant will almost certainly continue, and they will be looking for a continuation. There's provisions in the contract for contemplating its renewal beyond that point. The price per ton has what I would call an advantageous escalator clause for the town. It's 7/10 of one of the CPI indices. It's worked out well for us. The current price is $69 a ton. There might be a big change after 2027 that'll require some preparation. The contract stipulates that the trash that's supposed to go there is Southborough's residential and small business trash. So that's the language. Wheelabrator is privately held. I did look into them, LLP, European. So we don't have detailed financials. That's not ideal. The contract requires that they maintain a $50 million net worth. In my experience, that type of language is never of any use in real world. But they're probably stable, barring some force majeure, as it's called in the contract world. The owner does have a large portfolio of this kind of investments. It's not like an outlier. It's exactly what they invest in. They have these kinds of investments worldwide. I consider that a good thing. And we have no reason to believe that it's unstable. Furthermore, the dependence of Massachusetts on WTE plants is also good, because we had, in effect, you can say we have DPE in our quarter when it comes to Wheelabrator. They want these things. Now, this has changed over the years. 40 years ago, they were good. Then there was maybe 20 years when they were bad. Now they're good again. That's DEP, point of view on this, and great. I'm glad they're good now. They are still controversial, but everything in this field is controversial if you want to dig around. all things considered, I think it's great we have Wheelabrator. E.L. Harvey is a private trash, waste contractor. They support our recycling. They own the equipment over there. They handle it all, except they handle all of the major ones, but there are some minor ones that get handled by others, yard waste, miscellaneous things listed here. The costs of recycling materials has been very fluctuating, but mostly up. Probably it used to be free. That era is probably never coming back. Never is a tough word, but for right now, it looks like it's not never coming back. The weird situation, just so you're all aware of how screwed up this is that commingled, when you throw stuff into commingled, that costs $100 a ton. When you throw stuff in the hopper, it costs $69 a ton. The commingled material is piling up in more or less what might be considered above ground landfills around Massachusetts and other places because China's not taking it. No one knows what to do with it. And the recycling processors are not absorbing it fast enough. And of course, there's a huge temptation if you can take in at $69 a ton and burn it up for if you can take in at 100 and burn it up for 69, it's a big temptation to cheating. I don't know that that's going on, but it's it's just not supposed to be inverted this way, and it can't stay this way long term, but that's the way it is right now. All right. Now let's look at what are our volumes and costs by type of material. MSW or refuse, the stuff that goes in the big hopper, 2,500, a little over 2,500 tons in fiscal 19 for $174,000. Our tonnage, Southborough's tonnage, has slowly declined over 15 years per capita and in absolute terms. It appears that per capita has declined from 0.7 of a ton to a little over half a ton per person per year. And that's even allowing for some shift from public to private disposal, although our data on this is imperfect. This is all excluding commercial, which we've never known anything about. Our tipping costs are down from 7 years ago, due mostly to contract revision, but are now slowly going back up again. So you see some representative numbers. 2012, we spent $225,000 round numbers for refuse disposal. In 2018, it was up to 160. It was at 169, or down to 169, and it rose slightly in 2019. It's going to keep going up a little bit, but not sharply. They're well controlled and fairly stable costs overall. And right now, our situation is that our cost for refuse is $69 a ton. Statewide is reported to be around 100. So that's good for us. Recyclables, as I said, is unstable, is 22% of our total tipping costs, not volume. And I talked a little bit about commingled. It's worth noting that a few years ago, you heard a lot about single stream, that is, put all the recyclables together. Now that's unfashionable because you can't get it apart. The big problem with recycling is sorting. The Chinese used to do it with hand labor. No one really wants to do it. And consumers worldwide in developed countries are incapable of sorting recyclables adequately for direct use. So our total, Southborough's total expense for having the stuff removed from town was $231,700 in fiscal 19. And by the way, some cases we've got 19 numbers, some cases 20, few cases 21, but I've sort of watched this to be sure. That's just because the way the numbers are, but I've watched this to be sure that there's nothing screwy going on that would cause any problems with respect to the kinds of decisions that we need. So yes, some of these numbers are from different times a little bit, but it wouldn't change any results. All right, now let's look at operational costs here. These include the fixed expenses or the running expenses. The transfer station operations are listed here. For those of you, or particularly if anyone in the audience has looked at the official numbers for the transfer station, these are different by about $8,000 because The official numbers of the budget don't include retirement, which I picked up and got from Brian because I said it should be in there and put it in. So this is as far as I know, fully loaded labor costs. And then the disposal or tipping expense we just talked about, for a total cost of running the transfer station annually of a little over $540,000. Now, the main point to draw from this is what's shown on these arrows here, is that the fixed costs are the fixed expenses of running the transfer station are a large fraction of our total expense, over 50%. And the variable cost, we don't, Karen can develop these numbers if we want to focus, if we really want to sharpen it up, but variable cost, the separation between fixed expense and variable operating expense and contribution to overhead is not a way in which we normally do our accounting. So I sort of imputed some of it, but the variable cost is probably a little less than or equal to $80 a ton for refuse. And our total cost, our fully burdened cost per disposed ton is about $140. These are numbers we're going to return to these because they're significant when we get to the area of looking at other towns. And they're pretty good, by the way. So here's then the funding side of this. You got $540,000 you got to find. We get sticker revenues of $425,000, and a little under $120,000 gets covered by the levy. So that's sort of the basics. Now we need to step back for a minute. If we're going to look later on, if we want to look at alternative ways of doing this, we need to look at what the total waste costs are for the town. Because, for example, if we wanted to consider municipal curbside, then this would become a relevant number. The total costs are the sum of the T-station operations, what residents are paying privately for private curbside, and what businesses are paying for commercial, number 3. Now, as soon as I say this number 3 here, I'm going to cross it out because we don't know what it is, and no one else does it. And so, although technically it belongs here, we have no information on it, and we're probably not going to do anything with it. So we're going to total 1 and 2. So the transfer station costs are shown down here at the bottom, 543 again. If you take the estimated number of residential curbside and the probable cost of that, and these are some guesses here, then we estimate that the town's total disposal cost for all solid waste, including recyclables, is a little under $1 million, 983. So this number is relevant if you want to consider certain kinds of options like curbside later on. All right. So now let's focus in for a minute on what I call price volume economics here. These are sort of the things that drive businesses, right? Again, what we've covered for the basics. We have a large fixed expense. We got variable costs of about 80. We also, not covered before, we have lots of excess capacity for trash handling. Wheelabrator will take whatever we give them, and we could handle a lot more if we needed to. The market price for trash is in the $100 to $200 a ton range, depending on how it's collected. But for a transfer station type operation, it's not unusual to see $150 a ton, but for spot prices at a transfer station. So let's look at our current customer economics. The average customer household, now before we were talking about per capita, that's every person in town, but persons live together in households, and households are what subscribe to the T-station. So the average household here brings 1.6 tons per year, including recyclables. And the revenue we get from the average T-station customer is $173 per year after discounts at $250 undiscounted. Our estimated variable costs for all kinds of trash combined, not just MSW and recyclables, is about $109 per year. So the average customer of the transfer station yields about $64 of operating margin contribution towards fixed expenses. And that's an estimate including all recyclables. So what are the implications of these price volume economics that we operate under? Number one, it's bad if we lose customers at the transfer station. And if we gain them, it's good at these prices because basically we're making money on customers at given the average amount of trash that they bring in and what our costs are. So in order to keep the thing, hunky-dory here, we have to run a service that residents want when compared to the price of curbside. And you'll see later on when we get to town comparisons, Wayland and Sudbury have broken these rules and are paying the price. And it also implies that if there was a way to get more volume at close to the market ton per price, it could be beneficial. Now, saying number two doesn't mean it's snapping your fingers, but nevertheless, it's an observation that drops out of the quantitative analysis. So now we're going to take a look at comparable towns, And I'm first going to talk about how I picked the comparable towns. So in a sense, I did this blind. I didn't go picking them out based on how they do their trash handling. I queried the DOR, Department of Revenue, municipal data, Muni database, as it's sometimes called. It's online, you can do it. And I put in the term, I bracketed 3 categories of indicators for Southborough: population, 8 to 15,000, income per capita, 80,000 to 160,000, and property valuation per capita of 190 to 300. Basically, I used those because my experience, that's how you find people who behave similarly and will behave similarly. The results, if you put in those criteria, only 4 towns out of the 350 pop out: Southborough, Boxford, Medfield, and Norwell. But then you have to apply some judgment. You look at it and say, well, Boxford doesn't make sense because even though it fits those, the population is too spread out. It has half the population density, a little less than half of Southborough. And if you were ever to think about running trucks around to pick up trash, that's a big deal. So I edited the query and it included population density into it and broadened the income per capita criteria a little bit so that I wouldn't just eliminate one. And I came up with Southborough, Sudbury, Wayland, and Weston. And then I also did look at our neighbors' numbers that pop out of DOR, but they all don't fit, either because of population or income per capita criteria. And the final list of towns that I compared ourselves to, so there were 5, us plus Medfield, Norwell, Wayland, and Sudbury. And as I said, I didn't look at ahead of time how they were doing MSW. I also did, in the course of it, learn something about Medway, partly because Karen lives there, partly because the DPW chief in Wayland used to be over at Medway, and I interviewed him, and he went on and on about Medway. We could do more analysis of other municipalities. I don't think it would produce anything, but obviously you could keep going. So here are some data on comparables. I'm not going to go into these in details. It's a pretty tight clustering. My methods were I dove through the public documents, which works pretty well. And I interviewed I got a hold of 2 of the DPW chiefs and interviewed them, the one at Medfield and Wayland. Also noting that no towns handle commercial users. So now we're going to go through town by town. Medfield. It's the town that's most like Southborough in terms of how it does trash handling. Has a T station and has private curbside. That's the biggest single thing right there. Transfer station is open 3 days per week. We're open 4. Their fee is a little lower. They don't have pay as you throw. They have about 4,000 users. And guess where their trash goes? Same as us, Wheelabrator and Harvey. They use the same accounting practices that we do. That is, they don't have a revolving fund or an enterprise fund or any of those things. Tonnage is almost identical to ours. I asked for but did not receive their labor budget numbers, but I did get their tipping numbers because that's why I have the tonnage. So I don't know what they spend on their labor right now. And they've been nice to me and I haven't pestered them for their labor. They may not have the labor broken out separately for the transfer station. That, that varies all over the place. I asked the chief if they had considered municipal curbside. He said, yes, we did a few years ago. The citizens voted it down. So that's what they're telling me. In the summary, they're very similar to us. 3 days versus 4 for the T station. They have a much lower sticker fee and a little bit more on the tax rate. Norwell's interesting. They're full residential curbside. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same size as us. Weekly pickup, trash and recyclables both. No pay as you throw. The basic curbside service covers all normal usage, except, well, I should say, you get a barrel full of trash and a barrel full of recyclables, a little bit bigger barrel of recyclables every week. And so there's very little usage of pay as you throw. But it does exist. If you have more than the barrel, then you got to buy more. The whole thing is contracted out to Waste Management, who's probably the largest waste management company in the world. And the cost is $308 per household. The town also provides a recyclable center. I think it's a bit of a holdover from before they had curbside recycling. It has no fee. There's no refuse allowed. So it's not a transfer station that takes trash. And the curbside does include recyclables. I'm not quite sure why this thing is there. Now, 2 very interesting cases. Sudbury. Sudbury is a little bit bigger than we are population-wise. It has a transfer station with only 800 users that are authorized to bring refuse there. The estimated private curbside is around 4,600 users of private curbside. They have a fee of $170 per year to use the transfer station, plus the pay-as-you-throw of $240 per bag, and a long list of bulk item fees for specific things. They use the enterprise accounting method, $300,000 budget. They're chasing declining usage to keep it balanced. Note that they only disposed a little over 1,000 tons. And now here's the consequence of this. Their cost per disposed ton at the transfer station is $319 a ton. We're at $140. For $319 a ton, you should be able to get someone to come and pick and rent you, included in that price, rent you a dumpster and come pick it up every week. The number is crazy. It's just really high. And that's because they have no users. I mean, no, they have 800 users, but they have fixed costs just the way we do. Not quite as high, but they've got this ridiculously overcost service because it's whittled down to no users. They would save money if they could politically do so in their town to get rid of the transfer station and go on a municipal curbside contract, because everybody is paying more because there are probably 5 different brands of trucks riding around Sudbury, driving the same streets. Anyway, it's a lesson of what not to do. Wayland is not quite as bad, but basically in the same boat. And I interviewed their chief, and he knows it. So they have T-station, pay-as-you-throw, private curbside. Most residents are using curbside. Curbside is growing. The T-station usage is slowly declining. They have 1,875 subscribers out of 5,000. Open 3 days a week, 7 a.m. to 4. You see the other data here. They have a private company, Waste Zero, runs their bag distribution program. I think Sudbury uses them also. This is how you get bags out to the supermarkets. Their waste trash stream goes to a waste-to-energy plant called CMAS. It's like Wheelabrator, but it's down near the Cape, and they use a company called Casella, another big outfit for recycling. They use revolving fund accounting. They've managed to keep it okay in fiscal 2020. In fiscal 19, however, they needed an emergency $100,000 from their advisory committee's reserve fund, or their finance committee's reserve fund. The chief doesn't like the revolving fund system as it's too restrictive. They've had declining revenues and they've been chasing fixed high costs. Their $425,000 budget. Their cost per ton is $249. Again, compared to us, about $100. We're about a little over $100 cheaper. He said to me, and it's obvious, that they would save money by a single contract curbside shutting down the T station. He said, unfortunately, we just put $1.4 million into our transfer station. By the way, he asked me to share the results with him of this study, and I said I would. Nice guy. So what are the lessons from, particularly from Wayland and Sudbury? Don't take customers for granted. They can drift off towards curbside, fees and pay-as-you-throw can make it annoying compared to curbside, and people will leave. The high fixed expense is a key piece of the whole economic analysis here. You don't want to get stuck with declining revenue and then, town meeting voting citizens who love the transfer station, keeping it there while the costs go through the roof. Let's not get stuck in that situation. The chief at Wayland said to me, hey, the older residents all use the transfer station. Every new family moves in here uses curbside. And it's a very difficult job to make the economics stay balanced. We should probably go all curbside, but it's hard to get people to do it. Now, on the other hand, Norwell and Medfield both have completely different and good working models. Medfield's the same as us, but Norwell has a decently functioning curbside program that costs about 15% more, as far as I can tell, than what we have right now. But it's a one size fits all. It's, your trash must get picked up at the curb, and it has higher costs compared to people here or Medfield who use a transfer station. So let's look at what's the market in Southborough. The curbside, if you call up some suppliers and ask for quotes, some of them have them online, I think. $440 per household was the best quote that I got per year. You can pay monthly if you want. Our transfer station stickers at $250. So there's not a huge amount of room for price increase here. If you assume that curbside pickup is regarded as a better service by many, but not all residents. Some residents are going to tell you that they prefer transfer station. Some may even have both. We don't know. But a lot of people will say curbside is the more luxurious service, and there's not a lot of price gap right now here. Pay as you throw at a transfer station, you have to buy special bags or bag tags. And curbside basically gets rid of the annoying aspect of pay as you throw because you just have to fill a barrel. So those are things to think about if you think about tweaking the system. So now let's look at what the end of our analysis of comparable section. What's good about what we have here? We have choices for residents at varying price points. Over 65 are paying about $25 average for the transfer station, which is paying through their tax bill, covering that piece of covering that 118. $275 if you're under 65, that's the transfer station sticker plus the $25 that goes on the average house tax bill. And if you're doing private curbside, there's a range, by the way, quoted. 440 was the lowest, 630 is the highest. So maybe $500, $525 is what people spend total if they go curbside per year. We have a low tax burden, on the other hand, for non-users of the transfer station. So if you have residential curbside that you're buying, you're only spending $25 a year on the transfer station, which is going through your taxes. Commercial taxpayers can look at it and say, well, 96% of the cost is on the residents because it's 20% of 20%. They have no benefits out of this, but their cost is almost zero. Our cost per ton fully burdened is good, at least compared to the ones we're able to see. And it's been stable and predictable. It currently is absorbing a little less than 0.3% of the levy. So it's not, compared to the size of the levy, it's not a big deal. And the other thing is that from a social responsibility viewpoint, our trash tonnage this should be per capita, that's a typo, our trash tonnage per capita is going slowly down. This is best we can tell. I could explain to you how I tried to calculate this. We don't have solid numbers from the curbside, but we can impute it from years ago when we used to do both. And we used to all the curbside used to go and get measured and go to Wheelabrator before 2008. We have those numbers. We can sort of extrapolate. Best I can tell, it's going down. So that's all good. This is all good stuff about what we've got right now. All right, next major section here. We're going to look at analysis of possible choices. The choices that we face break down into two categories: operational and operational management choices, that is how we really run things. And the second is how we pay for things that we run. All right, so we're going to take a look at the operational, then we'll look at the funding. One operational choice would be, hey, this has been fun for 50 years. Let's do something different. Let's go to curbside. Switch to curbside. The sub choices then you would have if you wanted to do municipal, if you wanted to do curbside for everybody, is just get out of the business altogether. That's A here. Say, hey, we're not running a transfer station. Everyone just needs to go get their own private curbside contractor. Boylston, the town of Boylston, actually did this. Excuse me. I think might have been as much as 15 years ago. It works. However, it probably has the highest total cost for the residents. You basically have to take the number of residents times the price of doing it privately, and 4 or 5 companies running their trucks over all the streets. So it's just a costly way to do it, and it's a pricey way to do it. Not through the town, but for the town. I roughly estimate to be the town be spending, citizens in the town would be spending 1.8 million maybe for this, versus currently we're getting the trash done, including all the private curbside, that's actually happening for about 980. So that's a disadvantage of A. But Boylston, I don't think that they have regrets, but they may not look at this number very often. Or we could do what Norwell does, which is we have a private operator, but a town-wide contract. Best estimate right now would be somewhere between 925 and $1.5 million, 925,000 to $1.5 million. Medway, which I haven't mentioned before, but happened to stumble upon it, they have a very attractive contract per residence price. If we could get their price, it'd be $925,000 to do Southborough. Maybe we can't. It would cut the costs for all the current private curbside users, because they get the benefit of bulk purchasing. But for everybody else, for the majority of our citizens who are using a transfer station, the price would go up. I have examined the Wheelabrator contract, and there is no barrier in the contract to our doing this. Even if it resulted in our not sending any more trash to Wheelabrator next year. But there would be different ways. You could also potentially have them go through Wheelabrator, but we're not required. We're not tied up to. There's nothing about the Wheelabrator contract that prevents us from doing whatever we want of this type. It would also be possible to have town employees driving town-owned trucks and go around and pick up trash, but I haven't looked at that any further. Doesn't necessarily, if you wanted to do this, we certainly should look at that, at least formally, more carefully, but I haven't done that. You might regain some land if you demolish the T station. All of this would require further study, but it could be done. If you want to do it, if the town wants to do it, we could get there. But the question is, why switch? The current system works. There would have to be a strong citizen preference for curbside. It's the only way I can see that it would make sense to, throw this all over. And if the citizens wanted it, there's nothing here that says, oh, that can't work. It can work. There also is some towns have transfer stations that are operated by private companies. Westborough is right there. They have one. I haven't analyzed it extensively. Could be looked at more carefully. Didn't seem like it was something that we needed to beat to death in the first stage of this study. Okay. Then there's this another thing we could do operationally: keep the current transfer station, rebuild it. The rebuild concept is tear down the current big hopper in the shed that you see when you drive up 85 or you go in there. We would move the MSW shed, move the MSW collection point to multiple hoppers over near the current recycling area, which would also have some rebuild, and there would be no shed. All the compactors, recycling and MSW, would be owned by the town. The benefit idea of this is that it can be supervised by one employee down from 2. There might be some land repurposing, but maybe not. Karen may be here. You have to duke it out with Karen. I don't know. Modernization of equipment would happen. You get new gear. However, there's no financial justification for doing this that holds water. You save $81,000 a year potentially after 5 years of transition by reducing one person's salary and benefits. And so just because it's easy, I ran a complicated. You can just divide. You don't need anything fancy, but of course I did something fancy. And the break even is 31 years on the cash flow, which basically is not a financial justification. That you can't even talk financial analysis that's that long. So it requires some non-financial justification. There's not a financial. It's worth looking at. Okay, you say, well, we're spending $100,000 taxes. How can we get it down? Well, there's costs and there's revenue. So you look at the cost side. Say, what can you do to lower the cost? Well, this is something to do to lower the cost. But the cost of saving this expense is too high to make it worthwhile from a financial viewpoint. So that's this piece. Another operational choice I'll put in here: pay as you throw. It's always comes up as a topic. Right now, 137 of 350 Massachusetts communities have some kind of pay as you throw. By the way, DEP has a gigantic spreadsheet of all these things, and so you can total it up. I call this primarily a volume reduction system, and therefore put it on the operational side, not a funding system, because the revenue that comes through this is typically not the major piece of those. We looked at the towns that have pay-as-you-throw. Pay-as-you-throw is not generating a lot of money. It does cut down on tonnage, however. But it has the risk of destabilizing the revenue cost balance for the town and throwing us into that Wayland category that seemed to just have an unpopular transfer station, and a piece of it seems to be pay as you throw. So they keep paying to run the transfer station, but they don't move any tonnage through it, and they have a declining number of customers. So there's a real risk here if you annoy people enough that they'll go away. And our fundamentals of declining tonnage, it's going in the right direction already. So reducing it further and risking getting stuck in a Wayland-Sudbury situation seems questionable to me. It also requires you have a private distributor for bag retailers. Supermarkets aren't a great choice for us because they don't have any. So there are a bunch of issues here. So that's my not too enthusiastic review of pay-as-you-throw. Another option is to shorten the T-station hours. I have to observe that quite a few of the other towns that were in that sample group that we looked at have 3 days a week. And I haven't analyzed the savings issues. Karen and I discussed it briefly. I noted to her that sometimes, you can't baloney slice your labor quantities terribly easily in this business, but it could be considered, if people really were motivated to do so. We didn't look at it extensively, just thought get through the top level view first. Then there's again, with funding, there's also the question of equitability. Is it, do the costs fall fairly? So most of the fees are paid by users. Its system, as we have it, has a fairly low burden on non-users. That is, private curbside customers and commercial customers pay very little. Also, the senior discount, and I will, here if you can look at whether I'm in a butter to the construction project here, I'm in the senior discount category. It's basically, we've got different groups here in town that have different costs. We've 42% of households approximately have school-age children. There's a huge benefit for school-age children here. You don't need to look at these kinds of equitability factors, but if you're going to do it, you may as well do it quantitatively. And I would also note that Massachusetts law has few legal options in the levy law for bearing the burden based on the use of municipal services, few as in none. So the senior fee waiver has been a way of making a small compensatory equalization gesture. And you can take that as my bias if you want, but I think the statements stand. All right. Now, another funding choice is put the whole thing in the levy, stop collecting sticker fees. This has also been floated as a question. So we can look at that on the same kinds of criteria and some others. The first criteria is equitability. Well, it's much less equitable for non-users of the transfer station. Commercial entities can't use it by regulation, right? Our current rules, they would be paying their full share, and private curbside residents choose not to use it, and they'd be paying for it, equal share. So equitability is a disadvantage relative to our current system. Administratively, we would still need stickers. There was a time back when Andrew was a little shaver playing with my children, that we didn't have any stickers, and you just drove in. It was an honor system. But we're not going to go back to that. So we still need stickers. So there's not going to be much savings if you have to pay for them. And then fiscally, if you wanted to do this, you'd need to throw $425,000 into the levy, because that's what we collect from stickers. That's a little less than 1%. It can be done, but it's not trivial. And you could motivate your curbside customers to come say, hey, I'm going to vote no on that budget. But anyway, it can be done. Those are the pluses and minuses of it, as I see it. Okay, so now we still could say, well, we're $100,000. How can we? Let's step back and say, well, what can you do about $100,000, $118,000 of imbalance? Well, number one and number two. One, lower costs. Rebuild the transfer station. That economics doesn't look very attractive. The other possibility is increasing revenue by selling more solid waste tonnage. And here we would note that we have a situation in which we have a facility which has low costs and lots of spare capacity. You may be shocked to know that in 2005, we moved 2,700 more tons to Wheelabrator than in 2019. That didn't all go through the transfer station, but some of it went directly from curbside pickup. But our town, nevertheless, we pumped 2,700 more tons, almost double, to Wheelabrator compared to what we did now. So we have, and the transfer station has lots of spare capacity if we were going to move it through there. So the classic situation is you got low cost spare capacity. How can you sell somewhere? Is it possible? We haven't really looked at it carefully. We've just identified this as something that could be looked at. There's 1,100 tons estimated going through curbside right now. And there's an unknown amount of commercial tonnage. I'm not promising we could realize some gain from this, but the structure of the situation is such that, if you were to sell the T station to a private operator, if you sold it to me and you said, hey, you got to do the same deal you have right now for residents. You can't just bump up prices for residents. And I looked at it and I said, well, I got lots of spare capacity. How can I sell that? That's what I'd be thinking about. And so we should probably think about it. I don't know what will come of thinking about it, but we should probably think about it. All right, and then there's accounting methodologies. The two other types of accounting methodologies that kick around in this area that we don't use right now for the transfer station are enterprise funds and revolving funds. Both of them are provided by Massachusetts statute. They have different details, you might say. I did not look at carefully the possibility of transitioning to those. I think the first question is, what's the problem we're trying to solve if we want to do that? And the other thing I would note is that I stumbled into in interviewing the Wayland DPW chief that some restrictions on revolving funds were causing them headaches. Basically, revolving fund is a tighter, in effect, you might say, is a tighter set of rules than enterprise. In some ways, it has a deficit not permitted rule that resulted in a crisis 14 months ago in Wayland, in which they, might have to shut down if they didn't get $100,000 from the reserve fund because they were imbalanced, the revenue, they were out of money. The DPW chief is trying to see if he can quietly lobby to get rid of the revolving fund accounting there because he doesn't want to get stuck that way again. Sudbury has an enterprise fund, but their cost picture is terrible. So, I think the lesson is we shouldn't confuse accounting options with doing a good job. The accounting options don't produce doing a good job automatically. And because if you look at these two places, they both have various fancier accounting options, you might say, in vogue, but they're doing a terrible job. They're not doing a terrible job as people, or they're not dumping the trash on the street, but they're running at crazy high costs. All right. Now, I kind of said at the beginning of this that I was just going to basically try to provide information. But one thing did drop out that I think I want to recommend, which is that we get some more information in a way that we can as a town, which is that I think the Board of Health should license private haulers here in town with a low administration fee, just low fee, license fee, just to cover administration. Because we could find out what's going on in the town as a whole if we required information, the same kind of information DEP wants to ask. And that actually is in our Wheelabrator contract. Wheelabrator could ask for it too. We could say we don't have it. That would probably shut them up, but we should get it. And I think this is a good way to get it. There's also some risk that DEP might someday say, well, you've got to go to pay as you throw unless you can show that you have declining tonnage. So it'd be good to know what we have. So I think that this question and decision is entirely solely rests with the Board of Health, as far as I can see. And so I put the word politely in here. BOS advisors should politely ask Board of Health for this. I think that's my recommendation. Okay, we're about done here. I'm actually a little ahead of schedule. So let's conclude. What are the fundamentals? Trash, Wheelabrator looks good. It's the best solution possible right now here. Recycling is unstable globally, but we should expect continued volatility, particularly of prices, but we got to do it. Lessons from other towns. Some towns work nicely and other models can work, even municipal curbside, but we would need some reason to make the change. But also, there are ditches you can drive this operation into if you're not careful about what you're doing. You can get stuck with high costs and low value. And two of them that popped into our study show that. The choices we have for rebuilding the transfer station, that would need some non-financial justification. We could consider adding tonnage. Might work, might not, needs further analysis if you want to look at it further. But overall, and here's my sole invocation of an exclamation point for the night, our current system works pretty well. Those of you who worked with me for a long time know that I'm not a Pollyanna on things coming out of the Department of Public Works, but this is a good deal. It's a reasonably efficient municipal operation. Cost effective from what I can see. It's avoiding the pitfalls that we see in other towns. It's stable to the extent that it's possible to be stable. It seems reasonably equitable, has a low tax impact, you know, a little less than a third of 1%, 1/3 of 1% of the levy. And it gives choices at different price points, all of which are pretty good things. So there is some follow-up that could be done here in the way of, in my world here, not to mention, you know, you guys and the Board of Selectmen or whatever, figuring out what you want to do with this. But I would think if there's any interest in this Board of Health regulations subject, that we could research some other towns' regulations and draft some topics. I wouldn't attempt to draft the language, and that should be done by council, but I could say, here are 6 topics that are covered by other boards of health. I did notice, for example, that Westborough Board of Health was recently floating a revision to their private hauler regulations. So I know they regulate private haulers. But I haven't done this work. And also we could look at the possibility of additional revenue from capturing more MSW tonnage. That would be sort of feasibility study. It would also be possible, I wouldn't put it in the notion that I suggested this, but it would be possible to do some sort of a resident survey on curbside service. It would be interesting to know whether new residents who come into town here are more likely to use curbside than transfer station, because that's what the Wayland chief thought was happening there. And it would also be possible to investigate private ownership or operation of the transfer station. But I'm not cracking the whip on any of those horses at the moment. And that's it. 20 minutes early. There we go.
Well, and I didn't let you start on time either, so.
Yeah, so I'm good. I'm an hour and 15 minutes early. I'm 25 minutes early.
Well,
okay, so questions.
Yeah, so let's do this. John, why don't I have you unshare your screen just so that I'll be able to see everyone's faces.
Stop share.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think what we'll do here is, you know, my intent is obviously that we as a committee are not going to make any sort of next step decisions tonight. I'd like this really more to be, you know, we have John here, we have him as a resource. My goal is at the next meeting, you know, that everyone will have time to digest, get more information. I think some of us may go down different paths here based on what we've heard, but really get more information to then have a discussion and then start making motions around where we want to go with some of the stuff. You know, my personal view is some of the stuff clearly falls outside of capital in terms of where the town wants to go, right? We've already given the BOS a heads up. Obviously, advisory is going to weigh in. Public Works Planning Board is likely going to want to weigh in. There's a lot of mention of Board of Health. So I just wanted that to kind of be a ground rule for how we operate here tonight. But what I'll do is I'm going to go alphabetically amongst the committee members and just open it up. I'd ask maybe, even though John did a phenomenal job of keeping us on pace, keep it to 2 questions probably to start, and we can go from there. So Lisa, you're up.
All right, thank you. I will hold off on my questions, but I just want to say thank you, John. I am absolutely stunned at the amount of time and energy that you put into this. And you've certainly given us things to look at. I think that your final screens and your conclusions are certainly for me. I have a lot of interest in some of the suggestions that you had. But as a whole, I'm gonna look it over before I actually ask any further questions. But I just wanted to say thank you and kudos to you on a job very well done. You certainly benefited us and the taxpayers. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Kathy.
So a couple comments and then my 2 questions.
Sure.
So John, the one thing that we can't quantify, and we're probably two of the older ones on this, is that we know for a fact that people like the transfer station, at least people who like it really like it. When the discussion a few years ago about the swap shop was fully aflame, look what happened there. So my guess is that if this were to be proposed to do anything other than keep it the way it is, you're going to have quite a bit of pushback as far as that goes. Second, I don't know why anybody would use an enterprise fund or revolving fund for this. Sudbury and Wayland, they got what they shouldn't have done. So I don't know why we would even consider that. Then as far as the reason capital is really considering this is because 2 or 3 years ago on the capital plan, there was a placeholder for $3 million to redo the transfer station. That's gone down a lot. So are you saying that with what we've got right now, we're not looking at a big capital expense? That's kind of the whole reason we started looking at this.
Well, so that, I know that's why you started, and that turned into, at the beginning of this process, I asked Karen to sort of sharpen her pencil and get me a spreadsheet of how the rebuild the transfer station costs would break down. And her revised estimate was 2.5 million. And I said, well, okay, what are we going to save if we do that? And then it was basically, we're going to go from 2 supervisory personnel to 1. And so and I figured out all the costs of that. And I laid that against what paying for, 2.5 million would be, and it doesn't pay for it. So you'd have to, you have to justify that some other basis. That's the $3 million became the $2.5 million. And the analysis is there's not a financial only doesn't give you a justification for spending $2.5 million doing that. And the other question I had at the beginning was, hey, is this thing going to fall apart and stop running? The answer is no, it's not going to fall apart and stop running. We can keep it running. We have the skills and the planning and the good management to keep the thing operating indefinitely. So that's it.
Okay.
Anything else, Kathy?
Nope.
Oh, by the way, I want to mention one other thing. I was a little surprised to find in the course of doing this that swap shops are, officially goodness in the DEP world. That is, they want you to have swap shops. It's not just
prior to a pandemic.
It is what?
Prior to a pandemic.
Well, I guess so, but your chances of, and besides the fact that the citizens were outraged about the potential loss of that, the state officially wants you to have a swap shop.
Jason, let me just make a couple more comments real quick.
Okay.
We'll go fast. So John, the Public Works Planning Board they put together an analysis a few years ago and have made a recommendation that the transfer station be totally incorporated into the tax base. I don't know the reasons why, but that was their conclusion. So that's still out there. That's still their recommendation as far as I know. So we'll need to deal with that piece of it at some point.
Yeah, that's why I included that in the analysis as what's involved in that. Well, it's less equitable, and you got to find a place for $425,000 in the levy. So that's about much as I can say about it. There's no big administrative advantage. As I said, you can't get rid of stickers. So I'm offhand not sure why you would want to do that, given the picture we have right now here. And also, dropping $425,000 into the levy right now is, not the easiest thing in the world.
No, it's not.
Good, Kathy.
I'm done.
All right, Jeff.
All right. Thank you, John. Appreciate everything. I'll echo what everyone else said and really appreciate everything you've done on this. Question, comment. So one thing that might be helpful from a decision-making perspective, I know other towns are doing, Natick, for example, does a curbside pay-as-you-throw, where you buy the bags and they come to your curb and they pick it up there rather than bring it to the transfer station. I don't know what that would look like from a cost perspective and whether that would be something to look into to weigh against all the other options.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I didn't run it, and I didn't run into that explicitly here. That is, Norwell's case is you get to fill one barrel, okay, and it's a size that's specified, but it's pretty big, and you get to fill one barrel with trash and one slightly larger barrel with recyclables. From some analysis that I was able to do, it seemed as though the barrel was enough. So it could be, it could be that they are checking yes in the "Are you pay as you throw" box with Mass DEP. Mass DEP has a reporting system. If you're only allowed this much quantity and then you have to buy more, maybe that counts as pay as you throw. But the other extreme, which is, let's say, the Wayland Sudbury type system where you have to have tagged bags. I have not seen that in a curbside system, partly because you can't just have bags out on the curbside because they're too vulnerable to scavenger animals and other sorts of things. So you need barrels, and but I mean, I could look at there's probably everything that physically works somewhere in use here.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go last, so I'll go to Joe.
John, thank you so much. I got the slides this afternoon. They were an awesome read. I had a lot of fun, actually. I have a question, maybe not just for you, for everybody, but do we run all the town municipal trash from all the buildings through our transfer station as well?
No, it doesn't go through the transfer station, but I was actually, Karen covered that with me back at the beginning of our conversations, and I didn't incorporate it into anything. But I don't know whether Karen is here, but she could.
She is. I'm going to pull her in. So Karen, I'm pulling you into the. Actually, Vanessa, you took me out as host to make John a host. So I need you to either take John's co-host away, or there's Karen. Perfect.
Hello?
Thanks, Vanessa.
So Karen, did you hear the question?
Yes, but I forgot it.
The question is where do the schools and the town buildings, how does their trash move out?
It used to come through, it used to be brought to Wheelabrator by BFI at one point, and that was when we were doing that guaranteed annual tonnage. When we got out of that and into our new contract, at the time Basilio was still here running facilities, and we put a contract out for that to be picked up specifically so that each building had its own recycling system and its own trash. And so that's part of whoever has that contract, which it might be BP now, they take it to where BP normally takes it.
Yeah, I can imagine it wouldn't be necessarily efficient to run, trucks from our locations to our location and then basically repackage it and ship it out. But was wondering where that tonnage was going. John, another question for you was, when you're dealing with the private haulers, obviously, generally contracts are based on limited amounts at curbside. So anything extra is going to be additional, correct?
Right. That's the way usually they're written. Yes, that's right.
Okay. So the basic cost of the contract isn't really going to include the likely full cost to an individual customer in the town.
Well, that's true. But so it's interesting in the Norwell case, there was an accounting for the overage and it's very, very low. So in effect, that's why I was able to say for Norwell that the curbside barrel provision is covering the overwhelming majority of residents' needs. It's just there's very little purchase of additional conventional capacity. They do have scheduled items. You want to get rid of a mattress. There's that sort of stuff. But basically, the curbside that I looked at is pretty well covered by the basic coverage.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thanks. Like I said, awesome job. I really did enjoy reading it this afternoon. As far as discussing it later on, I think you're absolutely right that there are a whole lot of other questions and usage studies that we'd have to do among residents of the town to really consider the type of change if we're moving away from this.
If we were, but I want to be clear, I'm not necessarily recommending any of those changes, but formally they're you know, if you look at this once every 50 years, which is more or less what we're doing here, then you need to at least formally cover all the bases, even if you say, no, we don't really want to do that, you know.
Well, I mean, I think you're correct in the fact that if we want to modify our model slightly, knowing how people are using it, would make a huge difference as to what system works best, right down to even lawn crews, because we have we have lawn dump essentially there, but how many people are using lawn crews to haul away the yard waste would also be an interesting part of the study in the usage of our transfer station versus the alternate services.
Yeah, lawn is a funny category. There are a couple of things that aren't accounted for by tonnage, and that's one of them is accounted for by truckloads. So it's sort of like, this isn't a completely neat world.
No. No, it really isn't. Thanks, John.
Sure.
Andrew?
All right, thanks, John. This report was great. I think you touched on everything I was looking to do. I had some time earlier today to dig into it a little bit. And I've had pay-as-you-throw bags, which was a disaster. The bags were, the quality was bad. The string would rip off on every single one. And then to your point, you leave them on the curb and raccoons come and dig through them, and the curbs are a mess. I've also done pay by weight. So they take your bags and they weigh them, and you pay 15 cents per pound. This is an interesting one. But it's kind of slow, and I don't recommend it. And then I've done regular curbside, and then I've also done, the transfer station, of course. And, I honestly think the way we're doing it today is what I think is, equitable, because you have optionality. But one thing I did notice when I was looking through the numbers, I think you had for town employee labor costs, I think you had 234K, which I think might be including the supervisor in there, 3 people.
There's an allocation in there. So there may be some specific questions I need to go back on, but there was an allocation for supervisory responsibility in the cost that Karen gave me. And then I went back to Brian and figured out what had him figure out what the retirement costs were, and we put that in.
Yeah. I'm thinking
it's mostly 2 people. It's mostly, however, 2 people who are full-time.
Yeah, and I think those 2 people full-time is 140K. So I just think we're adding in a person that's kind of a fixed cost because they manage other teams outside of transfer station.
Well, I'd have to open up the spreadsheet to give you the breakdown, but there are also drivers. There's some driver cost in there, driving to Wheelabrator. There's a couple of other labor categories that don't add up to full-time people that are in that gap there.
All right, sounds good.
So, Andrew, anything else from you?
That's it.
All right. So I think what I would say, I have a few questions, but I guess just while Andrew's point brought up something I was thinking about is, I think a lot of you are going to have individual questions. So what I'll do is I'll share John's email address. If you have Andrew, for example, that example, right? If you want to see the data that John was working off of to get to that 230, just email John, right? Obviously, let's not copy anyone else from the committee, but if you're thinking about how you want to come back and bring the discussion back, I think, John, unless you have an objection to that, just having an individual committee member, because I think you may get 6 different sets of questions. Apologies in advance if some of them are duplicative, but obviously we're constrained by open meeting law as well. So I guess my 2 comments were, number one, it's very similar to where Kathy went originally in terms of the capital piece. But now that we have Karen on screen, it's more a question for Karen. So I wanted to get Karen's reaction to, obviously there had been a placeholder, call it $2.5–3 million for a capital item related to complete overhaul efficiencies of the transfer station. You heard John's rough math of a 31-year return on investment. Do you feel comfortable with the statement that if we don't do a major capital, right, and the town's willing to keep the same operation, keep the 2 people in the two locations in terms of the hopper and recycling, that's a fundamentally sound process? Or is there something looming with the hopper that we need to be wary of 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? So I'd like to hear your reaction to that, because I think that's really important to how this committee in particular reacts to the capital component that needs addressing.
So John and I talked on Friday, we went over all these slides, and when I saw that payback 31 years, it doesn't, the math doesn't work, so it doesn't make sense. So we do keep capital, the expensive pieces, the pieces that are very hard for us to find because it's such an old machine. Some stuff has to get special made. We do keep extras on hand. I think for now, right now, the way it works is when it does break, we usually be able to fix it within 2 to 4 days. So it's not a huge problem for the residents. I think when it gets to the point that, geez, we're really having trouble getting it back running for, like a week at a time, the times it happens, or it happens more than once a year, then we might have to do something. But, to John's point, like he said, we have kind of a system in place, and it does break down probably once every 18 months or so. So, I'm trying to be proactive with maybe doing something, but a 31-year payback, and we don't know in 10 years, maybe people want to do something totally different, and it wouldn't be worth the $3 million just now, then would be a bad investment. So I'm good with the hold off, if that makes sense.
And you've been budgeting that 5 to 10 that John referenced a year for that's in your operational budget of just, something's going to break this year. You don't know what it's going to be, but it's roughly a 5 to 10K expense every year that you carry in your budget.
Yes. So we carry like a 5K of special maintenance, and then we carry 10 in case of a break. And then, if it got to the point that it got worse, I mean, that's obviously a time when the advisory reserve fund would have to come into play, because we do have to keep it running, obviously.
And those numbers, by the way, were in the fixed operating expense numbers that I showed you.
So can I step in one more time, Jason?
Go ahead.
So John, if you were having to give a recommendation tonight based on what you've done so far, it sounds like you might say, keep what we have, consider going to 3 days instead of 4 days open to save some money. Consider trying to increase some volume by doing something to entice people who currently use curbside and or commercial to start using it. Watch the trend as far as people stopping using it. Maybe it is younger people that tend to be busier and they do the curbside. It's not worth the couple $100. Would that be true?
Yeah, I would say, as I said, I would like to get a little harder data on both the curbside collection and the commercial through a Board of Health regulation process. That's going to take about a year, okay? Because we were kind of guessing on some of it. I might do the survey of newcomers to town and see if we have a trend going on that they're moving away from use of the transfer station. I don't know if they are, but that's what's gone on and undermined, driven costs up so much in Wayland and Sudbury. So we've got that process going on. I'd like to know it. Then I think I would look at the question of whether we can get any more revenue, but I don't want to sound to this group here as though I think that that's easy. May not be. It just needs some further analysis. When Karen and I talked about it on Friday, she was at first enthusiastic about it, and we just need to look at it. I don't really know, but we have extra capacity and we have low cost. So let's see if we can drive some more revenue through there. That is already metered revenue. In other words, commercial or curbside. So those are the things I would do right now.
What about trying to get rid of commingled recyclables?
Well, we're under. We don't have any. The DEP's, has got our hands tied legally on that.
But do we have to offer that? Can you
Yes.
offer?
Yes. You have to offer it. Yeah, you don't. You in fact, it's a mess, but it's not our mess. Our hands are tied on that. I don't think we have, I don't know, Karen, is there any choice to like try to insist on more user sorting? I don't think so. I don't think we have any choices there, really. It's just a problem.
So I guess along the lines, my second question was related to the commercial. And I know you kind of punted on it in a few areas. You kind of said, I'm raising it, but then moving on pretty quickly,
Yeah,
John.
that's
I think
right.
was
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's so I know you only looked at roughly 4 or 5 towns, depending on how you viewed Medway in
Right.
all of this. I think it would be interesting and would welcome your thoughts. It doesn't have to be tonight, but how we get data of, is there a way to charge a separate commercial rate? Like, for example, I know if you read a lot of the commentary, for example, on the blog postings, right? People are very concerned that people pull up in commercial vehicles oftentimes and are dumping, right?
Yeah.
Their job site, right, from the week or the day in there, right? Like, so even if we just focused on that, right? They may be Southborough residents, but would welcome like what abilities we have to regulate based on type of license plate. Like, I don't know what the rules are or aren't, but
Yeah.
and I
Well,
don't
if you can have
expect
a
a
split
reaction
tax
tonight.
rate, why couldn't you have a split trash rate? One
Okay,
would
so
think you
a
could.
couple different things about this. A couple different topics have come up here just in this minute. Let me just cover briefly a few of them. One is the subject of inappropriate usage at the transfer station. Karen and I talked about that right at the beginning, and I thought that we had the impression from some occasional policing that we've done that the frequency of that was low. I did talk to a police officer from the town, I don't remember his name, who has done that a few times for us, who said, yeah, there's not a lot. But, it's a popular topic among, sort of inflamed citizenry, everybody's cheating over there. There always has come up the possibility of various types of stricter enforcement there. But sort of on the assumption that it really wasn't, that when we've tried to investigate it, we haven't come up with much, that it wasn't a big part of things. I don't know. Karen, do you want to jump in on that aspect of this at the moment?
No, I really can only agree with you on that. We haven't seen a lot of problems, and as far as people from out of town or without permits coming in, as much as I think people think there is. Commercial, we do try to, if we see someone dumping a lot, we do try to, stop that and make sure it's coming from the person's own home. Because if you're taking apart your own deck, you can bring it to the transfer station. It's allowed.
It depends on what the deck consists of, as long as it's not made of concrete.
That's right, no concrete. So we do try, but we also haven't been really strict about people putting recycling in the hopper because of the cost. So we do police as best we can within fiscal.
Yeah, and I guess where I was going with that question, right, is knowing that it commonly is raised, but I guess what I'm hearing is it's not viewed as a major issue in Southborough, based on the people that actually look at this, right, on a daily basis, and hearing the word commercial, wondering how we would actually, like, if we do find a way.
Okay, so let me talk about that for a moment, Jason.
Okay.
The commercial situation is complicated. The only easy part of the commercial situation really is what you might call office trash. But a lot of businesses have special DEP requirements governing the types of things that they generate. Car dealerships, tires and oil and other and metal, all have special regulations. They're not things that can go into the transfer station or into the MSW stream. Food restaurants, wet restaurant organic waste is another category that DEP has, broken off and has special rules for. So, if you're Framingham or, Waltham or something, you have enough of each one of those categories that as an entity, you could have enough restaurants or enough to deal with those special kinds of waste. But Southborough really is not going to be able to have a program for dealing with different specialized kinds of commercial waste because we're just not big enough, you know? So the kind of commercial waste that we could potentially deal with are from, you know, offices. But by the way, then you have to have recycling also pick up because there's a big recycling component for office waste. So that's why I said it needs to be looked at, but it's not, we could never as a town sort of say, okay, we're going to take all the commercial waste of all the entities here, because there would be small quantities of stuff that have highly specialized legal requirements.
Understood.
Jason,
Okay.
if I may,
Go ahead, Lisa.
one other comment to add to that. You have to be careful when you're talking commercial vehicles. I said that at a Board of Selectmen meeting as well. For instance, I'll use myself as an example. My husband has a company vehicle. He goes to the dump. It has commercial plates on it, but he is not taking anything other than our household trash. So I think there's a fine line. There's a lot of families in town that have a vehicle that may be used for business, but that's not the instance of them, what they're actually taking to the dump. So I think we just need to be very careful when we start talking about taxing or finding commercial plates, right?
Well, that's exactly why I asked the question, Lisa, because I know that's the case. And hearing that there may be opportunities with commercial, we would have to think about how do you define that, right? And it's not as simple as just saying you have commercial written on your license plate, because you can be driving in a sedan that says commercial just because the company owns the car in some instances. So no, fair point. So unless there's any other burning questions from the committee, what I'm inclined to do is open and see if there's any public participation. And then we'll come back and wrap it. We'll let John go and wrap up as a committee for next meeting dates.
Hey, Jason, can I just ask one quick clarifying question?
Go ahead.
John, when you talk about commercial, our contract only allows, I think you said small businesses, right? So we couldn't, to your point, do like a full commercial thing, right?
Well, so there are many reasons why we can't do full commercial, one of which I touched upon, which is the specialized nature of some of the commercial. Small is the language of the contract is small businesses, but small is not further defined in the contract. So a car dealership might be considered a small business. Certainly a Dell EMC is not a small business under any stretch. And some others that are here are not small businesses. That would need to be looked at, but it may very well be that the few truly larger entities that we have that are clearly, you can't in any way shoehorn them into the small business category, that they don't have any trash we can deal with anyway. So I don't know. I mean, it just would need to be looked at. In some ways, I'd almost we have no data, and we have no way of getting data except laboriously, unless we do what other communities have done, and which is sort of recommended by the state, which is to require licensing of haulers of this, and then we can get the data and we can know what we're talking about. We don't know what we're talking about now. I'd have to survey every business and somehow get a hold of the person who knows about trash. You know how hard that is? I mean, it's just, hello, I need to talk to the person who does trash. Well, it's not easy to get that unless you really need to license the haulers to know what's going on.
Okay.
Great.
Open it up
One
to.
thing I want to mention is that the version that Jason sent out there are some very small tweaks to the one that I presented. So I'm going to send one to Jason. We agreed I'd send one to him after this meeting, which is the one I presented, and just that to be the official one. They're only cosmetic, really.
Jason, can I make one suggestion quickly before you move on? It might be useful to send John's presentation, because I think his presentation is more than just a capital presentation.
Oh, of course.
So if we could forward it to the Board of Selectmen and advisory as well, I think
Kathy's already forwarded the draft to advisory. Okay. So I will forward the final that John sends me to BOS. So.
Okay, thank you.
And I had warned Jason that this was going to cover the universe.
Certainly did. So I will open it to public participation. If you have a question in the audience or comment, now is the time to raise your hand. I'm promoting Sean Rose. Sean, you're on mute. Just your name and address before, well, we know your name. Address before we proceed with your question or comment.
Do you hear me?
We can now.
Okay. So I live at 3 Lovers Lane. And then my comment is, I think it's wise for you guys to do a quick online survey, maybe like 5 questions or something to the residents of town. So you can probably capture more data about what the residents are doing with their trash. So it sounds like there's some holes on that, especially on the curbside stuff. So my wife and I are new residents of town, and like we came from a place where curbside service was provided by the community. So it's coming to a place where we were expecting something that's not offered as a service, right? So are we willing to adjust to going to the transfer station, or are we willing to pay for that type of luxury of service for trash? So I think that type of, like I said, online survey to the community would be good to gather more data to make a decision for you and the BOS and the rest of the committees. So
Thanks. Appreciate the comment. Anything else, Sean, before I move you out of speaking role?
that is all.
All right. Thank you. Do we have anyone else that wants to?
I don't see any other raised hands.
All right. So with that, I think, John, we are all set with you for tonight. I'm sure we are gonna need some content in the future. Again, echo everything. Phenomenal job. I think obviously it speaks for itself, and I'm sure there'll be more updates, whether it be Board of Selectmen advisory or this committee as we move forward.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm basically going to send you the final version that as presented, and then I'm just going to wait for anything further that comes. If you want me to join another meeting, I will. Otherwise, I'm going to stop pestering Karen and we'll be done.
Yeah, I will let you know when we post an agenda if it's anything related to this topic's on it and where we're going with that discussion.
All right.
All right. Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Good night.
Good night.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Leave. I like that button.
All right. So Karen, I am going to, unless you have anything else, I'm going to move you out as well. Appreciate you joining and staying on. Okay. So what we are going to do now is just talk quickly on meeting dates. So I had sent around an email the other day. I heard back from most of you. It looks like of the dates that I proposed, the only date that is going to work is the 14th, which was a proposed 7:30 start time PM. Can everyone make that? Because that's going to be a pretty full agenda, to be completely honest with you.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So that will be our next full meeting. Now, there are a few topics that likely we can dispose of in 15 minutes. I don't feel comfortable talking about them tonight because they're not on our agenda. But I'm looking to see if we can grab 15 minutes before then for a quick meeting, because there are decisions that I don't want to make in a silo and I need the committee's vote and support on. And it would be great to have a view on two items before the 14th to make sure we're not going down the wrong path on each of those 2 items. One relates to the ClearGov software that the town has recently purchased, and one relates to how we're going to advance the school conversation. So I can't post a meeting any earlier than Friday at this point, given that the clerk is going to be busy with the primary tomorrow. There's nothing that says, and we have a holiday on Monday. So I'm just looking to find a 15-minute block. If we don't get it, we don't get it, and we'll just have to wait till the 14th. But I don't know what people's limitations are or aren't. I know there's some vacations and other things as well. So I'm just throwing it out there. If we can't figure out a date and time,
Jason, I'm flexible other than Friday.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week, I'm all pretty open.
I'm
Joe,
flexible.
I see you nodding your head yes.
Well,
Kathy?
I would respectfully state that the first one's probably fairly easy. The second one, I can't imagine we're going to do that in a couple of minutes as far as.
It's not charting a plan. It's,
I understand I think I understand what you're trying to do, but I still think even that is a pretty big discussion. I could be wrong.
okay.
Is Friday of next week a possibility, or is that not?
I could probably do like very first thing, but that would be it for me.
I could do that.
Why don't we do something early?
Okay. Is 7 a.m. too early for anyone?
Nope.
Or 7:30? I see. Lisa, you want 7:30?
Who said it was too early?
Well,
Andrew?
I got a face from Lisa.
All right, I can do 7. A half an hour really doesn't matter.
6:30?
Oh,
I'll
God,
do
no.
7. I'll do
No, no, no.
7:30.
No, you can do 7. 7 is fine. I can make 7 work.
7:30 is
No
fine.
problem. You forget, my son just went to college, so I have no little ones or anybody at home. So,
Oh,
you
Lisa.
know, yeah.
We'll send them over and wake you up, Lisa.
Oh, no, that's
Yeah,
okay.
but
That's okay.
I'm sure between the collection, we can send someone over. Yeah. All right.
7
I'm gonna
is
go with
fine.
7. I'm gonna go with 7:30.
Okay.
Pending. I haven't checked the virtual meeting room availability. My guess is it's probably available. And I promise to make it a half an hour. And if we, for some reason, cannot advance the discussion, then we'll just continue on Monday night, the 14th.
So you said 15 minutes.
Well, I'm open to. I really think it's gonna be 15 minutes.
Okay.
It's a one, and then there'll be a much more substantive conversation that Monday night. Okay. Anything else anyone wanted to cover tonight?
Were there
12 minutes? 12 minutes.
Did you do changes to the minutes first thing?
We did.
Okay.
Jeff is gonna. We did not vote, Joe.
Okay.
So Jeff is just gonna mark them up, and then we'll vote probably on the 11th.
Yeah.
Latest
Oh,
the 14th.
All right. So well, I can do the changes when whatever they are. So.
Yeah. So you just watch the replay, and then I think Jeff. You know.
Change them, send them around again.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll mark them up, Joe, and I'll send them out.
You want to do it, or you want me to do it?
I will. I can do it.
Okay. All right. I'll let you. Yep.
All right.
Well, I was talking the meetings for the last minute. The minutes for the last meeting. That's
Right.
is that, okay.
Yes.
That's correct.
August 10th. Okay. I'm going to make a motion to adjourn then. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Second by Andrew. Roll call. Braccio,
Aye.
Cook,
Aye.
Hark,
Aye.
Palmer,
Aye.
Pfaff,
Aye.
and Malinowski. Aye. Thanks, everyone. Have a great
Thanks,
night.
everybody.
Thank you. Have a
Bye.
good night.
Aye.